Well, hi everybody. It's Joe Chaffee here on this Tuesday night, the 18th of December. Week from today, it's Christmas, so you've only got, I guess, 6 shopping days left, and maybe if you're doing it online, you probably have far less with delivery. So pay attention, folks. Okay, don't get caught without getting the gift that you're supposed to get for whoever it is you're getting it for. Now, we got a very interesting night ahead weather-wise. There's a lot going on with a storm that's coming at the end of the week that is going to be rather complex in nature. And also, we're seeing the energy from that storm that's going to develop coming into the northwest. And we had a tornado, believe it or not, not very far from Seattle. I saw some of the damage, some of the video. I had a live feed from KOMO in Seattle going on my Facebook page, and it looked it might have been an EF2. I mean, I'm not versed in what all the criteria is with regards to the tornadoes and the sustained damage, but there was quite a bit of damage here. So this was, I don't think this was an EF0 or even an EF1. It looked pretty impressive in terms of some of the damage that it caused. And if you're not familiar with it, I did check up on pulled up a map on Google here. So I'll show you where it is. It's actually on the other side. What you see where Seattle is here. Port Orchard is to the west on the other side of, I can't read, what is that, Ellicott Bay and Puget Sound. So it's on the other side of the Puget Sound in Washington State. So, and just to show you how close it is to the Pacific, it's close. There's westernmost Washington. You see Tacoma, Seattle, Everett, Olympia, and Olympia National Park. So we're really talking about the northwest corner of Washington State. I'm not really very familiar at all with how all the meteorology works up there and the local climate. I occasionally will look when it comes to snow forecasts, and I've said recently a couple of times how the criteria in some of those mountain areas must be pretty large, where they have winter weather advisories up for 18 to 24 inches of snow. So, of course, a lot of those areas have very, little in the way of population, or perhaps no population at all. It may just be a stopping point going through the mountains. Here's the radar at the moment. I can't really see on this loop that goes back about 5 hours or so where the cell was, or if it was embedded in. It must have been embedded inside that area that moved right over Seattle and then moved eastward. There's more waves of rain coming in. This is the northern stream energy that is going to get together with the system that is down to the south already, and you're already seeing a rather impressive satellite signature. I'm going to bring up the U.S. satellite loop here. And, whenever you see a signature, the swirl or the comma shape, you know that something's up here. And there it is, just kind of spinning away down in New Mexico and West Texas. You've got this little subtropical feed of moisture starting to come in and beginning to set the table across the Gulf states. There's not a whole lot of precipitation falling at the moment, but then you've got that northern stream energy that's up moving through the northwest and into the northern Rockies. That is eventually going to phase with this southern system when it gets closer, when the trough gets to about 90 degrees west. We're going to see a full phase of this, and that's going to create a low and a deepening storm that's going to run up the southeast and up the Appalachians. This will also be a severe weather producer. I think there probably could be a fairly impressive line of strong to severe thunderstorms on Thursday in the southeastern U.S. and in the state of Florida, particularly in central and south Florida. So that'll be something to pay attention to. Oftentimes, while Florida does get its fair share of severe weather. It doesn't always necessarily pop up in the southern part of the state. Also, the seasonal factors involved with regards to the weather now versus the weather as you go deep into the spring, summer, and early fall, which is more dominated by weather going on in the tropics. And here we have these weather systems, these non-tropical or extratropical storms that are developing to the north, and they're trailing cold fronts, producing some rather strong thunderstorm activity. So that's something that Central and South Florida, and in particular, really probably South Florida, should be paying attention to. In fact, the Storm Prediction Center, 2 days out, has already got that part of the state at risk, and we'll show you that shortly. Now, when this all gets going here in the east, as far as rain is concerned, the WPC, the Weather Prediction Center, has done a little bit of adjusting in their forecast. It appeared that this morning, with the initial forecast, probably wasn't bullish enough in terms of rainfall, and I'm wondering whether it may have to be beefed up a little bit more. But certainly, this could be at least 1 to as much as 3-inch rain producer up and down the East Coast, east of the Appalachians. They have it depicted the way they do, with some areas getting a bigger concentration than others. They look at this stuff really, really close. I'm focusing more on my own local area, of course, but in a general view, you could probably paint a broad brush of at least 1 to 3 inches. And in the areas that are probably in convective risk, Florida, the Carolinas, and maybe even into southeastern Virginia, you might have some higher amounts due to the possibility of thunderstorms. And by the way, I think it's quite possible that we might see thunderstorms even up to New Jersey and southern New England out of this at some point later on Friday. On top of that, we're going to be dealing with, I think, a strong southerly flow that develops for later Thursday night into Friday morning. And that's going to cause some tidal concerns, I think, for the south shore of Long Island and possibly for parts of the Jersey coast, depending on whether the wind is more, say, southeast or south-southeast or more straight south. Either of those directions are going to have an impact to the south shore of Long Island. The south wind will probably have less of an impact for coastal New Jersey as opposed to the southeast wind, but it's close enough where I think there will be some coastal flooding concerns. The one positive through all of this, by the way, is the fact that the full moon was on the 15th. So we are going to be 5 days past the full moon peak and going into the first quarter, which is a lower tide, high tide cycle. So that at least works out as a positive. If we were just past the full moon, this would not have been a good situation. Now, I'm going to go back to the radar with that swirling area down into New Mexico and Texas. There really isn't very much there yet. You're just beginning to see some showers breaking out across central and northwest Texas, that kind of narrow arcing arm. So the beginnings of that energy, that vorticity max is beginning to organize and slowly pushing its way to the east. And in the meantime, here in the east, of course, it's pretty quiet up and down the east coast. The storm that was southeast of Nova Scotia is now moving away. We had a very cold but windy day today. A lot of it, most of the places where I cover, didn't get much above the mid-30s today, with wind gusts to 35 miles an hour, which paled, by the way, last night when I got home, a little after midnight, the cold front came through, and when I tell you the wind howled, it howled. We must have had gusts of 50 for a while last night, and I spoke to a few people who said that they actually woke up this morning to find that their fences have been blown down, that the stuff was branches broken all over the place, that it was just a mess. But that wind, I heard it, was out of control. But the radar, at least right now, from the standpoint of any precip, is quiet, and for the east anyway, it will be quiet for tomorrow as well, before we start seeing things going downhill. Now, in the west, you had this occluded front and storm. I mean, there's a storm sitting well up the coast here as a 972 low approaching British Columbia and moving inland. And another low is analyzed here, even though the isobars aren't exactly drawn the way you would think it would be with the surface low being analyzed there. But nonetheless, they got a low drawn there with another occluded front. So that'll be the next wave of moisture that'll be coming into the Pacific Northwest. And remember, the WPC had this whole area getting 10 inches or more of rain in the next 7 days, and that continues in the current forecast. I neglected to point that out. So there's more action to come with regards to what's going on in the Northwest. So let's go to the forecast maps. I'm going to start with the NAM here, and I want to first, I'm going to take you through the surface, and then I'll show you why the NAM does what it does. So, and why I may believe some elements of it, but not necessarily other elements of it. No problems tomorrow. Clearly, the high, nice day, not much in the way of wind, a really good day, temperatures getting up into the middle 40s. Now we're going to start to see showers and heavy downpours beginning to develop in the western Gulf. This starts to move eastward. You get an area that expands into the central and eastern Gulf as we move into Thursday morning, and that begins to spread inland into the Florida Panhandle, into Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama, and that is going to continue to move its way to the northeast. Now, as low pressure develops and the trailing cold front, here's where you start to get the potential for a line of strong to severe thunderstorms. The NAM really fires them up Thursday morning in the off the west coast of Florida, and brings in some fairly strong cells. These lines are, when you look at these lines and how they form, oftentimes you'll get clusters of heavy thunderstorms in one place, less so in other places, and you can just kind of follow the colors the way the NAM actually sees it. And we don't know that it's going to be exactly right, but the bottom line is, through that whole area in the warm sector, there's going to be a squall line of thunderstorms moving into northern and central Florida, and then eventually into South Florida late Thursday afternoon into Thursday night. And then the low itself begins to move up the coast. And we have a low forecast to be in central North Carolina by the NAM by 10 o'clock Thursday night. And with regards to the severe weather threat, let me just show you what the Storm Prediction Center is already doing. So whenever they usually have a storm threat out a couple of days out, it wouldn't be a shock to see this area expanded some, and then who knows, they might even have to go to an enhanced risk in some spots in Florida here come later Thursday. But you've got marginal risk for coastal North Carolina, and then you have a marginal to slight risk for much of narrow band there in central Florida, but just much of central and southern Florida showing up as a slight risk of severe weather for Thursday. So if I'm down here, I'd probably want to pay attention to the forecast going forward. The low itself, what winds up happening because of how the trough is oriented, you're going to get the low pressures just going to kind of get stretched out. And you'll see a surge of rain that will move up Thursday night into Friday morning, and you see it right there. And then there may be a bit of a break until you wind up getting a second surge. Now, look in the Gulf of Mexico again. You see that rain area that's being generated there? That's actually the bottom of the trough that is going to be lifting up and going in what we call a negative tilt, northwest to southeast. So a lot of this is going to try to lift northeastward. And actually, the NAM offers an interesting scenario because it develops a second low from the bottom of that trough. This really is the low now that becomes the major low center as it goes up into Canada. It just has shifted everything a bit further to the east. And you've got a 981 low sitting at New York City by 1 a.m. Saturday. And the NAM's argument here is that the very cold upper low and some what we call do-it-yourself cold air, it shows it actually changing to snow over in parts of central Pennsylvania. In lieu of what just happened this past weekend with the upper low and the fact that we didn't have a whole lot of real cold air around, I'm a bit dubious on the NAM's viewpoint here with regards to showing a changeover. I'm not going to completely rule it out, because of the time of year and because of the dynamics. It didn't work this past weekend. It didn't work on Sunday. It's gonna have to. I'm gonna have to be a little skeptical now because it's trying to do the same thing, and I'm not 100% certain that you're going to have this happen the way the NAM is picturing it. Here's how it looks on the upper air. Look at this trough, by the way, and think back. If we go back, I don't think it's going to go. Actually, it does go far enough back. This is the system this past weekend, and if you recall, we talked about going into this how we had this wrapped up vigorous cutoff low in the southern part of the jet stream, and we also had a short wave that you can see up in the upper left that was coming along, but they stayed separate. They never really phased together. That phasing occurred somewhat in time for the low to strengthen when it got south of Nova Scotia. Okay, by that time it was really long gone for everybody else, but the vigorous nature of this upper low created some pretty hefty rains for areas for New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, into southern New England, and those areas, southern Hudson Valley, and so on. And for the Mid-Atlantic, some places in the Mid-Atlantic rained for 2 days straight, like down in the Washington, D.C. area, for example, where they added to their record annual rainfall that they just set. Now, that was that system. This system is different. The two areas of the jet stream are indeed going to phase. And here's the full U.S. view of that second system now. So we're going to bring it along. There's your southern shortwave, okay, right there. In West Texas. We saw that evident on the satellite loop. You're seeing that energy that's in the northern stream coming into the northwest. The southern energy just doesn't really move very quickly, so the north basically has plenty of time to catch up to it. And now we've got this phasing trough, this phasing deep trough, pretty much at around 95 west. Okay, you have a ridge in the west building up the west coast. You've got a ridge just building off the east coast, and the trough in the middle. There's no cold air with this. All the air with this coming in is either tropical air coming out of the Gulf of Mexico or the Pacific air that is moving in with the northern part of the jet and moving into the Rockies over the top of the ridge. But this trough sharpens up, and then you can see how the bottom of that trough just kind of starts to try to lift up northeastward up the coast. This is what the NAM is envisioning, and that's why it's doing what it's doing. That southern part of that trough is the strongest part, the deepest energy there as it lifts up to the northeast. And when we do by comparison, we can take a look at the late day GFS run. So this is a pretty impressive system here overall. And by the way, I'm thinking we'll probably see temperatures reach up into the 60s as far north as New York City and possibly even southern New England, depending on the wind direction. If the wind goes south or even south-southwest, you probably will see that. If it stays more south-southeast, then it's going to be a bit of a fight. But the GFS also, look at the southern part of that trough, just cuts off and lifts up negative up the east coast. So this is pretty important here with respect to the outcome that we're going to get. With respect to coastal flooding, I want to just touch on that for a moment here. We'll come back close up. Where the GFS and the NAM differ is the fact that the GFS has more of that inland low up the Appalachians, kind of holds it together. But if you look closely in a different way, there's a closed isobar here sitting right over New York City. So there's probably going to be some kind of secondary low on the point of on some sort of occluded front, perhaps, that is going to be evident. And because of that, the gradient gets pretty tight when we go through Friday morning. The winds starting really early Thursday are going to be from the south. So you're going to have a long duration here of south winds. Then they go actually east-southeast for New Jersey and Long Island. So this is a tidal concern These are sustained gales up the coast of New Jersey Thursday night into Friday morning, covering Long Island. You've got some sustained winds up to 35 or even 40 knots touching the coast. And then you've got that big red area of 40 knots plus over eastern Long Island from the south-southeast on by Friday 1 o'clock. This is because of that. There's your low, the low being the low that's in southwest PA, but then you've got that second low, that little vortice there that's sitting right over New York City, tightening that pressure gradient up. And the gradient is also very strong going into southeastern New England as well, before ultimately all of this lifts up to the northeast. And then we get the winds to go back the other way. You see how the isobars go from south to southwest and then eventually to west and west-northwest. It is going to still be very windy here on Saturday. If you're traveling in and out of the airports in the Northeast, and particularly Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and down to D.C. During that Thursday night to Saturday time frame, anticipate that you're going to have delays either from the wind and rain on Friday, or depending on the timing, it'll be earlier down in Washington, D.C. You'll start to have problems, and later as you get up to Boston. But the bottom line is that heavily traveled corridor, particularly on a weekend going into Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, a lot of folks are going to be flying around, getting from one place to another. Anticipate delays in your flights because of these weather conditions that we're talking about. I'm going to go back wide, and let's also. I want also just to illustrate that the impact here is going to be from Florida on up to Maine. There is no snow. There are no snow or ice issues of consequence with this system up and down the East Coast. I mean, it changes. It's going to be rain all the way up into Caribou, Maine, into New Brunswick. You do have a little bit of snow being generated on the west side. That remains to be seen. Sometimes it happens, and sometimes it just shuts off. So just bear that in mind. There's no guarantee here that this is going to turn out that there might be some backside snows. I would think that there probably will be some. I just don't know how extensive they're going to be, and I don't have a whole lot of confidence at this stage of the game when it comes to the forecast. I'm going to jump back to the NAM for 1 second. And by the way, before you ask, the European is pretty much in line with this. I guess the devil is just in the details. But there's that first surge of rain. But there are thunderstorms here that are being generated by the NAM, even up and along the New Jersey coast. This is late Friday afternoon, Friday evening. Long Island, it looks like it gets hit pretty hard. So does New York City, if this is correct. It would make sense considering what the NAM is doing. Even the GFS is bringing a big batch of heavy rain in through this area. And then finally, you start to see improvement maybe toward the early morning hours or perhaps toward daybreak on Saturday. The NAM is very slow in getting this out of the way, and we can't really go beyond, we don't go beyond 84 hours on the NAM, so that only takes us to 1 a.m. Saturday morning. We can swing back to the GFS, and the GFS actually by this time has most of the precip done, but even the GFS during Friday afternoon, Friday morning, it's got that first surge of rain, and then you've got this line of heavy rain during Friday late morning into the afternoon, and lingering showers going into Friday night. The GFS is a little bit faster. It has a different outcome because it kind of brings up that coast, that low that it forms near the coast, and the inland low. They sort of ride up faster and up the coast. And get further to the north a bit quicker, so weather conditions do improve faster. But then Saturday, you got wind to deal with. The gradient is still very, very tight. Still kind of breezy even into Sunday with the low to the northeast and the high to the west. But at least it's going to be dry. And then that takes us into Christmas. The only model that is doing anything with regards to a chance for even a remote chance for a white Christmas is the European, and I'll bring the surface map up of the European for you. The problem is that the European keeps flipping things in terms of these, weak upper air systems that are going by, which the other models are just basically keeping a very flat look to the flow, and it doesn't really show very much. So now instead of having something for, say, late Sunday night and early Monday, early part of Christmas Eve, it actually waits until Christmas Day. You see that low? That's Christmas morning in southeastern Missouri, with a high sitting over northeast PA. And then by Wednesday morning, it has a weak low off the New Jersey coast. It did produce an area of precip that was mostly snow. The southern edge of it was about New York City, Long Island, northern New Jersey, north and northeastward and northwestward. But it was a very kind of narrowish area of about 1 to 3 inches. I have to tell you, the Christmas purist in me would like to see a light snowfall, maybe starting Tuesday evening and lasting into early Wednesday morning the next day. But I'm really highly skeptical of this, if only because of the fact that, except for the Canadian model, which shows a very, very weakened version of this, and to a lesser extent the parallel GFS, there really isn't, they're not doing very much. The difference in the upper air here is where there's a short wave right there. You see this short wave here at next Tuesday, Christmas morning, in northwest Iowa, access down into Missouri. That's the European, and it holds it along, that little blue spot that you see over New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania and New York City. That's what's left of that shortwave trough. If we bring up the GFS for the same time frame, it's got nothing. Okay, it's got the eastern part of an upper ridge building there. It's got absolutely nothing. The parallel GFS has a slightly flatter ridge there, so maybe there's a very, very weak shortwave in the flow, but beats me. I can't see it. Actually, you can see it on the parallel. It's further north, going into the Central Lakes, and it just completely falls apart. You could barely find it by the time it reaches here Tuesday, and it's moving so much faster too. I mean, there it is Tuesday morning. Okay, by Tuesday afternoon, it's in eastern Michigan. By Tuesday night, it's overhead of New York City, but very, very weak. Probably just produces a few clouds or maybe a passing flurry, and that's it. And then done. And then the ridge builds back as we get ready for the next weather system for later next week. Now, we're going to do the long range. So everybody sit down, because it's very, very interesting. We're going to go do the stratosphere. And those of you who follow Dr. Judah Cohen on Twitter, he's been tweeting about this on and off all day of what the GFS did with the polar vortex in the stratosphere, how it's weakening it, and it actually splits it in 3. And it did it for a couple of runs in a row, which was even more impressive. But just to back it up, in case you haven't been watching the last few days when I've been doing this, this is the polar vortex at the moment in the stratosphere, sitting somewhere between Greenland and Siberia, up there in the vast Arctic wasteland near the North Pole. And you've got this upper high that's sitting up in the northwestern part of North America. And the idea is that when the polar vortex is very strong and very tight, all cold air tends to be drawn toward that polar vortex. When the polar vortex is weak and it's spread out, this is when you see cold air masses moving much further south than where they otherwise would be. So at this stage, which is where we are right now, this is actually, I take it back, actually this was on Saturday the 15th. So this is where we were a couple of days ago. This is where we are right now, 0Z Wednesday. The polar vortex is pretty much stretched east-west across northern Siberia. You've got this upper high in the stratosphere up in covering much of North America. Follow as I go backward, we're following this warm spot that starts out in Africa near Morocco. Okay, so that would be, if you're looking for it on the map and you're not too, it's hard sometimes when you look at the hemispheric view to figure out what exactly you're looking at. You have to kind of, stare at it for a little while. But if you look on the side where the scale is there, you see 68, 64, 60, 56. So if you look where between 60 and 56, there's this light brownish patch. That's actually warm air. And if you follow the loop along, you can actually see that warm air move across Europe and Asia, and then it really just magnifies like crazy. This is super warm air that's attacking the polar vortex. And I'll bring it down a bit further so we can at least look at the time. This is Christmas Day. That is very, very impressive. And the polar vortex is reacting now by pivoting around, and it's weakening. The vortex itself is beginning to stretch. Suddenly now you've got the flow in the stratosphere coming from Siberia over to Greenland and into North America. And you have two distinct centers, one sitting over Europe and another one over Greenland, pushing down into Labrador. This run actually just about completely split the vortex in two, and there's actually a third vortex that forms back down through Asia, through north of Japan there in the stratosphere, with this big upper high kind of trying to squeeze itself in between. Now, this is a very impressive event, this warming up in the stratosphere. Usually it takes about 10 days to 2 weeks for it to play out on the surface. That would suggest that then if this starts this coming weekend, let's just pick Christmas Day as a round, sort of a round number, that you give it about 10 days to 2 weeks, and you're talking around the second week of January. And certainly we should start to see the upper air changes beginning to take shape as we approach the new year and go beyond. But this has implications for the winter, for January and possibly even a bit longer than that, where you're going to have cold air with this split vortex, and part of that is going to be coming down into North America and particularly into the east, and the other one winds up going up toward Europe. And of course, this assumes, by the way, that it really does wind up looking this way, to which there's no guarantee. Just bear that in mind. We've had a couple of snapshot runs of the GFS doing this, and we're assuming that this is going to be close to correct. One of the things that is, at least from the standpoint of the timing of this, this is already getting underway. We're talking Christmas Day here is only a week away, and the model's going to probably not be too far off in its assessment here at the point of Christmas Day. But it's beyond that you start to question. I mean, is it really going to get to a split? Is it going to fall short? Is the warming going to be enough? It would seem that based on some of the measurements from Dr. Cohen's tweets, that this is a very impressive stratospheric warming event, and we're going to pay close attention. If anything else, this is a learning experience for me, because I'm actually going to be quite curious to see what the outcome is with all of this going on into the stratosphere. And the other thing is to remember too, folks, it's no guarantee of how the patterns are going to shape up. We don't know exactly where the troughs are going to be, where the ridge is going to be. What's going to be the status of the Pacific jet? Is it going to be feeding systems in like it has been and continues to do? Is that going to continue going into January? The weak El Nino pattern would suggest that that would be the case. So just bear that in mind. This is a very, very important event that's occurring in the upper atmosphere, and we have to pay attention. Maybe it's also quite possible, and I'll put it on the table now, just from the standpoint of being realistic, this could all wind up being much ado about nothing with respect to storminess if those storm if the jet is altered in such a way that perhaps everything is too weak or too far south, or maybe not, too far north, or not far enough north. All those arguments that you make when you're looking at these things in the long range are going to remain regardless of what the upper pattern is. It's just that it seems like we're going to be going into, we're going into winter, and the atmosphere is prepping for a winter onslaught of some kind, and it looks like it might be in the eastern part of the U.S. We shall see. All right, we will sit back and just watch and see it all evolve in front of us, and you guys, of course, can all watch it with me. Now, assuming that we have nothing to worry about for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, we're still kind of under the same old pattern. So you're going to have another system coming into the west, and this is going to try to ride up to the Great Lakes. The GFS has a low running up to the western lakes, and then it has another one that follows that, also comes a little bit further to the east. I'm a bit suspicious of the specifics here. The parallel GFS perhaps is showing us that the fact that we have a negative NAO for much of the time, even though it's not a strong negative, it's a negative NAO for much of the time over the next couple of weeks, that might have some impact on some of these systems coming eastward. The first one, again, assuming nothing happens Tuesday night, the first one will be late next week, and this is where the parallel GFS is kind of saying, you know what, we've got a negative NAO here, so maybe there'll be some cold air hanging on. I think that's what it's seeing. Whether it winds up being this way is a whole other matter. And then that goes by, and then you have another system that comes out as we get into the New Year's, and again, that maybe the NAO is still slightly negative, or perhaps it's gone neutral. I don't know, but it's going to take a little more time for the overall pattern to move to switch around as it starts to react to all that stuff going on up in the stratosphere. So again, a very, very interesting long range setting up. Of course, front and center, we've got this storm that we're going to be dealing with along the East Coast from Thursday right up through Friday. And we will likely see, by the way, I didn't get to it, so I guess I can do it now. Give me 1 second here. I'll get rid of this. So then I'll come to the board with you guys. We do have the beginnings of the first flood watches are up here in the east. I don't know. Mount Holly decided to kind of go ahead and fire and put the flood watches up already for parts of eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and eastern Maryland. We also have, now you see all the action going on in the west with all that energy. That bright blue, by the way, up in Washington and Oregon, those are avalanche warnings. So you have avalanche warnings up there, winter storm warnings, some winter weather advisories, and even a few winter storm watches up. And of course, you've got a peppering of wind advisories, high wind watches, and high wind warnings also up for parts of the central and northern Rockies, and on up into parts of Oregon and northeastern California. You're likely to see those flood watches. I think tomorrow morning you're probably going to see more flood watches go up and down the East Coast in preparation for another 1 to 3 inch plus rain event, and more in those areas that are going to get thunderstorms. Those cities in North Carolina that have gone over 100 inches, you're gonna put some more on top of that. Washington D.C., you're going to extend your all-time wettest year record amount by a couple of more inches. New York City, you're going to push your number up further up into the top 5 with regards to rainfall. Very, very. It's been an amazingly wet pattern that started during that in some areas in the Mid-Atlantic at least goes back to late last spring, as our Johnny Quest will be able to tell you on the chat board. Okay, who's talking weather modification here? Because we don't do that. Okay, we don't do weather modification. All right. Let's see. KOMO is the TV station. Timothy Veltman put that up there. You can either go directly to their website or you can jump on my Facebook page. Like I said, I have the feed of that going on. Now, just running through everybody's chat here. The video, the shots from Port Orchard were impressive. I mean, there were houses that were just gone. So this was more than just an EF0 or EF1. 1950 to 2017, Scott Burler says Washington State has had 120 confirmed tornadoes. So it does happen, okay? It does happen. But I don't understand the meteorology and the climatology of that area in the Pacific Northwest. I've never been. One of these days, I plan to do that. Okay, so the hurricane season, Johnny asking about, there's a hurricane in the Indian Ocean. This could be related to, probably, I say could be related, it's probably is related to the Madden-Julian oscillation concept, which is kind of long to explain, and I was just doing some reading about it, and I'm not, quite ready. It's basically about the pulsating tropical weather and the winds that occur from the western part of the tropical Pacific all the way into the Indian Ocean. And there's a correlation between the activity that's going on there, whether it be very moist and very active versus very dry, depending on the winds, because you do get dry air that comes down from the north, from the mountains in India. That drier air gets into the Indian Ocean, and it impacts the tropical, the development of showers and thunderstorms there. But in certain phases of that oscillation are favorable for cold and snowy weather in the eastern part of the United States. At other times, depending on the phase, it could be exactly the opposite. So right now it's going into phase 5. I have to talk to somebody that knows the Madden-Julian oscillation and what phase 5 means. Everybody seems to be hyped up about phase 5, and I'm not sure why. But if I find out something, I'll let you know. A couple of local Mets, says Steve LaPointe, might hit close to 70 on Friday. I don't think it's impossible. It depends. If you get if you get warm sectored all the way up, and you can get that wind to go around to the southwest and not from the south or southeast, I think it is doable, particularly in interior New Jersey and southern New Jersey. Not out of the question, but that's a big if. The wind direction is going to mean everything. If you've got a strong, screaming southeast wind, then it's going to be very, very. You might get it. You might be able to get it up into the low 60s, but it might be tough to push it much beyond that. We'll have to figure that out when we get to later Thursday into Friday. I can't tell you how oftentimes it would look like you're going to get the warm front through, and it doesn't go through. And then there are times when the opposite happens, when you think that the warm front is not going to go through, and it goes screaming through. Frank Karajat, 781. I think it's 781, and maybe 2, but or it might be 81 and 2. But that whole sequence there, 781. I recognize that those phases I know are cold for the east. Phase 5 is warm and wet in the central and east U.S. in an El Nino. Thank you, Izzy D. Appreciate that. So each phase has a different impact. But again, I would always, as I've emphasized with respect to when we look at the teleconnections, there are times when they make sense, and then there are other times where they don't necessarily make sense. They're not magic bullets. They all have, they all kind of have their roles to play. So you could, if you have, if the Madden-Julian oscillation is working in one direction, you could still have stuff going on in the other direction in the U.S. It may transition eventually to what the Madden-Julian oscillation is pointing to, but all those things take time, and it's a process, and it still doesn't always help you with trying to resolve the issues of a long-term forecast. And that is a long-term question you're just asking. you didn't really get any snow in the cold stretch we just came out of, and you're one of the few areas that did not. I'm not seeing anything in the short range, obviously, so we're going to just have to wait to see what the pattern gets into when we get into the beginning of 2019. Let's see. When you were talking about the polar vortex splitting, was that warm up in the Arctic region essentially a big blocking high? Well, kind of. I mean, it's not high pressure all the way across, but you are going to see higher than normal pressures at the 500 millibar level and lower if all that winds up playing out. Look, this is new to me in the sense that I've never really looked at the stratosphere at the same time that I'm looking at everything else. This is probably one of the first, I did it for a bit last year, so I'm paying more attention this year. I want to see what this split means. How does that translate to the overall upper air pattern? I can see what those that have worked with this before, I can see what what they are saying, and it makes sense to me, but I want to actually see it with my own eyes on the maps to see what it looks like, because then I can, make all the necessary connections I got to make when it comes to making a forecast. Oh, Joe Gaffney, you're on. Good. Nice to see you, buddy. Hopefully, I'll get in another library talk on the island soon, and I'll see you there, because I know you like to come out to them, and I thank you very much for that, by the way. So let's see. Andrew Thieberg, you've been bamboozled. I don't recall an El Nino with potentially very deep cold spell coming. It doesn't look to ever show either. I would go back, Andrew, and look at a number of years where we had moderate to moderate El Ninos and even borderline strong El Ninos, where the El Nino, it depends on whether it's east-based or central or west-based. The winter of 95, 96, I think, comes to mind. But you know what? Double check. But the presence of any kind of El Nino is not an automatic cross-off for cold and snowy winters. It just isn't. The pattern that we're seeing right now has only just kind of reared itself in the last 10 days. We haven't been seeing this since the middle part of October, when we were in a pretty chilly pattern. So unless I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, the presence of an El Nino does not eliminate a cold and snowy winter. The records are littered with El Nino years and cold and snowy winters, because there are other things at play. When it does have big impact is when those El Ninos or La Ninas, if they're east-based and they're very strong. Because when they're very, very strong, they just basically overwhelm everything. Think back to 15, 16, which was off the charts as far as the El Nino is concerned. That just overwhelmed everything except for a 3-week period. So in that case, yes, the strong El Ninos trump everything. But moderate to weak El Ninos, you got other things going on. Let's see. When the polar vortex comes down into our region during this time of year, is the whole vortex or pieces? It can be. The whole vortex usually doesn't get much further south than 50. Every once in a while, it does get south of 50 north. Usually, it'll come down in pieces, or it'll just, arms will rotate around. You get energy that just kind of rotates around, one short wave after another. So that's it. 7:51. We're 49 minutes in, so we're going to call it a night. All right. Thanks for being here tonight. Really appreciate it greatly. We've got more going on weather-wise on my platform on Patreon, and that's a subscription platform. It's $2 a month, and there's some higher tiers if you're a snow removal guy, because I know you snow removal guys like to watch my live streams. You've told me so. But there's I've got more info on there, and you can message me at any time directly, and there's the link to it. So take a look at it. As I said, that's my subscription site. If you have an Android mobile device, not ready with the iPhone version yet, but if you have an Android device, I have a free app on Google Play, and you can download that and install it on your phone and enjoy. Actually, we're planning to submit an update to that app in the coming days. So there'll be some new stuff on there in addition to what's already there. And if you are just days away from Christmas and you have yet, as most men usually, and some women, have yet to do your Christmas shopping, you can do it online by using my Joe Stradamus link to Amazon. We are part of the Amazon Services LLC Associates program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for my channel to earn fees from Amazon by linking to them and their affiliated sites. So if you go on that link and you use the search box and you do your shopping, you get your stuff, and Amazon, in thanks, throws me back a few cigars, and Christmas morning I'll find those in my stocking. Thank you very much for those of you who have done that. Mirtha Gunter, nice to see you. Hello and goodbye. I missed you. I saw that you were posted before. Thanks as always for being on. And get ready for some rain where you are in North Carolina. And that's it. So we'll put an end to it here. The Joe and Joe Weather Show on Facebook tonight at 9:25. Patreon members, you'll get that tonight, and everybody else, it'll be on the YouTube library probably first thing tomorrow morning. And we'll be back tomorrow right here at the same time, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, right here on my YouTube channel. Good night, everybody.